So we will go into the questions. We have some questions that students submitted, as well as faculty members got from students in their classes. So we will go ahead and get started, primarily centering it on fall 2021. So first question for you, President Mahoney: how is SF State prioritizing or determining which classes or activities to offer in person in the fall?
So our goal is to have as many classes and campus activities as we safely can. And San Francisco, the city and county has been very conservative in its planning to date because it's followed the science. And now as the science in the news improves, every day almost we get more information about the city opening up or plans for opening up. So our goal is to have as many classes and activities and spaces open as we safely can. We're prioritizing the departments, the classes that have just struggled the hardest to do this remotely, the fine arts, right? You know, throwing and things like that, the performing arts, other kinds of classes that really need hands-on learning. So we're prioritizing those. We're prioritizing senior capstone experiences and I know that'll make you sad as a senior who didn't get to do that, but senior capstone experiences. And then our new students, freshmen, and our sophomores who have never been to campus. We're gonna have sophomores who've never seen campus. And so, so we're prioritizing those groups. Few, if any, will have a full face-to-face schedule. But what we're hoping is that those groups will be able to take a decent amount of courses face-to-face, some remote, and then opening up campus experiences too. So things like planning to open up Mashouf again, all within the Department of Public Health's rules. And then making use of our outdoor spaces for activities. I know, for example, the theater department is discussing what it would be like. How could they have an outdoor performance in October? So we're going to do the best we can to maximize the amount of the number of classes and experiences that students can have in person in the fall.
Awesome. The next question came from a concerned student who, just generally might feel comfortable coming back to campus. So what if I need a face-to-face class, but I'm not comfortable coming to campus in the fall?
We will accommodate students who want to study fully remotely. Again, most of our classes will also be offered remotely. But if there is a course offered face-to-face that you need but can't be here for, we're going to work to make an accommodation for you. So students who want to study fully remotely in the fall, we're going to accommodate them.
Well, easy as that. Yes.
Well, the details will make it a little challenging, but we'll get it done because we recognize that some people are not ready to come back or can't come back yet. And so fall is very transitionary. So we're going to work hard to accommodate our students.
And I definitely think one thing that we've learned throughout this whole just academic year is just flexibility is key. Flexibility and understanding. Okay, so we will move on to our next question. So will larger class sizes be offered for remote classes for greater availability for students?
So the size of classes is determined by the department and the college and in their planning. So courses will be ranged. The face-to-face classes will be smaller because we have to physically distance. We're going to plan for 6 feet, which really limits the class size. But if the city moves to 3 feet for adult learners, then we'll increase the caps in those classes. Online, there'll be a variety. There'll be small classes online. There'll be large classes online. If a student is having trouble accessing a class, they should contact their department chair, contact their dean's office, or contact undergraduate studies. Let us know that they're having a problem, but there'll be a range of options.
Options are key, definitely.
But I do really want to hear if students have trouble accessing classes. I've worked in the CSU now for close, I think, to 13 years. And student complaints about access to classes has been a perennial challenge for the CSU. And we've made a commitment to eliminate that challenge. So let us know if you're struggling with access to a class, whether it's in person or remotely. Let us know if you're struggling.
Yes, definitely. So moving on to just services in general, and it could also be activities. The first question is, will SF State still offer virtual services in the fall?
Absolutely. A couple of things. First of all, we expect a lot of students to remain remote. When we surveyed students, about half said that they want to study remotely in the fall. And that's good because we do need to keep the density on campus down in the fall. So we will have remote services. But the second thing we've learned is that some of our services are actually enhanced by remote modalities. And so I'll give you the example of academic advising. Our academic advising appointments increased 20% this year, because I think students could just better avail themselves of advisors because they didn't have the time to commute, or they could do it at their own schedule. And so I think actually the future is hybrid for us. I think that we will, even post fall 2021, have a combination of virtual and face-to-face services. But in the fall, you'll be able to access the same things you were able to access remotely this past year, you'll be able to access remotely in the fall.
That's good to hear. And I think as a student who did get academic advising virtually, I think overall there's some services, like you said, academic advising, and I think also counseling could also be another one where the services have been enhanced because of the accessibility of just logging onto your computer face-to-face, well, virtually face-to-face with either your advisor or a counselor to really just, talk it out rather than an hour car ride or a BART ride to campus.
And I think the fall is going to be very transitionary. But I think once we kind of get the fall launched, our conversation as a campus has to be what worked about what we've done, right? And what's the good part? What can we keep? And I think students are going to want more online classes. I think they're going to want to come back largely face-to-face. They want to see each other. They want to hang out on the lawn. I was remembering today what the lawn is like the first 2 weeks of the semester with all the clubs and orgs outside. Most people want to come back to that experience, but they might like the flexibility of, instead of 5 face-to-face courses, they may want only 4, or they may even want 3. So I think we're going to look past the pandemic to say, what do we want to keep? What actually made this a better experience for students and employees? And so, but right now it's kind of all hands on deck to plan for this very transitionary fall, and then we'll think about the post-pandemic university.
Yes, exactly. So moving on, in regards to just programming in the fall, whether that be in person or virtually still, given the transition period. So this question was posed by a student organization. So will there be programs or events that students could attend in person in the fall? Will there be outdoor programming? Will students be able to gather outside of classes, as in Cesar Chavez, or on the quad or West Campus Green?
I'm hoping the answer is yes, yes, and yes. So yes, there will be activities on campus, but we do have to follow the San Francisco Department of Public Health. So, but we are now, Mashoof is creating plans on multiple scenarios. And I think it'll evolve too. So I think things will hopefully get better over the fall. Although I actually think the summer, I met with Mayor Breed yesterday, and she is a very direct person, which I appreciate. And she said, San Francisco followed the science in the pandemic and we stayed safe. And now the science is telling us how we can open up and be safe. So we're just going to follow the science again and we can open up. So I think there will be activities. So places like the Mashoof Wellness Center, the Cesar Chavez, and the library are going to be undergoing exercises where they start to plan what it would look like if the Department of Public Health says we could be at 50% capacity. What will it look like at 75? What will it look like? We know what 100 looks like, but I think the fall we're hopeful for 50 to 75. And so, yes, face coverings, let's all get comfy with those. So we will be required to wear those. But, if it means that I can go to the library or I can go to Mashoof, I have a husband who's dying to go to the gym and he will wear his face covering so he can go back to that gym. So face coverings will be here to stay, some distancing, following some rules. Outdoors, things seem pretty safe. So yes, there will be activities on campus, and we're talking about looking to see if we can get some tent coverings so that if we get some inclement weather going toward October and November. But yeah, we're gonna, again, following what we're allowed to do, there will be things to do on campus again.
That's exciting to hear. And I think overall the trends have been, for the most part, specifically San Francisco area, for the better. Now this question also was posed in the chat, but also is also one of the questions posed by many of the students. So will SF State require a COVID-19 vaccine to return to campus or to live on campus? And will vaccinations be offered through student health services?
So the first thing is we cannot require anyone to be vaccinated to be on campus. just to be enrolled or to work on campus. The vaccines currently only have emergency authorization, so we can't make it a requirement for enrollment or employment, for example. We are likely to require it for students living in housing, living in residence. We already have heightened vaccination requirements for students in housing. For example, they have to get a meningitis vaccine, but others don't. So we will likely require it for students in residence, but we will not require it for enrollment. But we're going to work hard on two things. We're going to work hard to inspire you to get a vaccine. I had my second. I'm very grateful that the state of California and the city of San Francisco put educators in a priority group. So I had my second shot about 10 days ago, and I cannot wait for Tuesday when it's the 14th day. Student workers who've been on campus have been vaccinated. And as of in about 12 days, on April 15th, all Californians 16 and older will be eligible for the vaccine. We have a vaccination site on campus that has been giving out about, has given about 90 priority slots a week to San Francisco state employees. Starting April 15th, they're going to double that to 200 and priority spots for our students. But other counties are doing the same thing. So Andrew, you know, you don't live in this county, do not drive up here. There'll be access in your county too. So, but we're going to work hard with a public service campaign to really inspire students to get vaccines. That vaccine passport is a ticket to, first of all, just your own safety, but also kind of your at least for me, it kind of makes you relax a little bit. So we're not going to require it, but we are going to encourage. And what will probably happen in the fall is there'll be a mix of testing and vaccination. So if you are not vaccinated or do not want to share that information, you'll have to go through some kind of regular testing. That's what we're looking at for fall. But again, the public health news is still evolving.
I think in regards to the student body, with the survey taken earlier in the semester, the vast majority, I believe 75%, or I believe
80, I think it was 80.
Yeah, 80% of the student body surveyed, of around 2,100 students, said they are highly likely to take the vaccine, which is encouraging, which, you know, could calm people's stresses about coming back who might not be comfortable.
And our staff and faculty, 90%, our staff and administrators said 90% are willing to get vaccinated. And, you know, when we surveyed students, Andrew, the vaccine wasn't widely distributed. People were afraid. Now, millions of us have been vaccinated with little or just moderate symptoms as a result. I just had a slightly sore arm. And so I think it's going to get higher than 90. So we're going to urge students to get vaccinated. We're going to help you find a place to get vaccinated. We'll find information. We're going to post information in the counties you live in about where you can click on. But we will not require it. We'll do some combination of testing, with the exception of residential students. We will likely require it, and potentially student athletes. I'm still waiting to get more information about student athletes.
Yes, that is all good to hear. You know, just the accessibility, people's calms people's stresses as well. So moving on to housing. Speaking of housing, we will definitely get into housing now. So will on-campus housing be available for students in the fall of 2021? And where can students go find more information or apply for housing?
I'm hoping somebody who's watching this with us can pop the link for housing in the chat. But yes, housing is accepting applications. They've gotten a couple of thousand. We have room for more students. And again, depending on vaccinations and public health, we'll accommodate as many as we can. Our minimum is to have at least 50% of our students back, our student housing slots open. But again, relying on vaccinations and public health rules, we'd like to even have more students back in housing.
Yes.
So please apply.
Yes, please apply. I lived on housing for 3 years. Well, on campus housing, I was a member of Residential Life for 3 of those years. So wait, I was an on-campus housing student my entire career at SF State until, you know, the pandemic happened, and then moved back home.
One of the reasons to require vaccinations for residential students, first is we've had a lot of support from our Residential Life student staff that they would like that. But it will relax what they can do in the res halls because everyone will be vaccinated. So they'll actually have a richer residential experience if we require it. So, but again, we'll be making some decisions probably later this month.
Awesome. And for other students, if you want to continue watching this series, I will be having a conversation with both David Rourke and Jenny Patano to discuss housing, specifically housing and how that's going to look like, how housing programs are going to look like. So stay tuned for that and when that flyer comes out and that date as well. Um, so continuing on with housing, so which groups are being prioritized for housing in the fall, if there's going to be any such priorities?
That I'm going to have to ask you to ask David
Okay,
Rourke when he joins you. I don't know how. I mean, our goal is going to be to try to accommodate as many students as we can safely house, but he can give you greater detail on priorities.
perfect. We will save those questions for David Warwick. So in regards to how tuition and fees could look like for fall 2021 as well as spring 2022. So this is the question correlating to that. So will there be a reduction in tuition and fees at SF State for fall 2021? And will there be financial assistance for students?
So tuition remains tuition. It's set by the Board of Trustees, and we still promise you access to the same spectacular faculty, whether you do this remotely or face-to-face. And we made sure that most of our services were available remotely. We are in the process of looking at a small number of what we call Category 2 fees, the Machine Wellness Center, the Gator Pass, and intramural sports. And we're going to see what we can offer in the fall and make some decisions about those in the near future.
Okay.
Oh, and financial aid, please apply for financial aid. And so first of all, there's the usual financial aid, the Pell grants, the state university grants, the Cal grants, and a small amount of student loan debt is not a terrible thing. We read a lot about the students who graduate with $100,000 of debt. That is not a San Francisco State story. Our students actually graduate with very little debt, but a little bit, if it enables you to do your degree faster, is actually a wise investment. But in addition, the federal government has, for the first time in my lived experience, really putting in significant sums of money into the universities so that we can do a couple of things. That we can open safely. We're going to be able to do improvements in our HVAC system, the way air circulates. We're going to be able to have smaller in-person classes. All of this is with the federal funding we're receiving. Testing, a vaccination program, all of that. But in addition, a lot of the federal funding is earmarked for direct aid to students. Now that aid at the moment is only available to students who are eligible for financial aid. So we have a Hope Crisis Fund that we're going to continue to promote as a philanthropic opportunity. And students who don't have access to federal financial aid, our undocumented students, our international students, and others will have access to the Hope Crisis Fund. So please don't let finances stop you from enrolling in the fall. We will help you find a way to pay for this.
Yes, and speaking of the Hope Crisis Fund, I know the senior gift this year will be allocating that gift to the Hope Crisis Fund for better so that's more so there's more finances in there for other students.
And I understand that part of the fundraiser for that involves me playing actually an online video game or something with all of you. So
Yes.
the last time I played a video game was probably 15 years ago, and it was my son's Game Boy, and I got really addicted to Super Mario for a little while. So I'm rusty. So it might be fun to just watch from all sorts of perspectives. But
Yes.
good. I think it's wonderful that the senior class is prioritizing the Hope Crisis Fund for students who follow you and need financial assistance.
Exactly. But it's going to be exciting seeing you play, I believe, Among Us, which was a trend for a while, and it's going to be interesting, definitely. It should be fun.
My son might tune in just to chuckle at me.
There we go. Okay, so given that fall 2021, as you said, is a transition, so there is going to still be a vast majority of the classes coursework online. So what is the university's philosophy on synchronous versus asynchronous learning / instruction?
So, we get mixed signals from students, to be perfectly honest. Students express a desire for asynchronous because it's really helpful for your busy schedules. You have work and other classes and organizations and all sorts of things. But then in general, they say that they get more engaged with their classwork if it's synchronous. So we get kind of a mixed message. So I think it's going to be a mixture. Some are going to be asynchronous, some will be synchronous. It'll be a mix, and it will say that in the schedule of classes when you go to register. And I also think even that for some who are on campus in the fall, some of those will be hybrid, where you'll have one class face-to-face and one class remote, which even pre-pandemic, all of the studies show that that actually is a very effective way for students to learn, where it's a mix of face-to-face and remote. So I think we'll see more of that in the fall too.
That's good to hear. Like I said, flexibility and accessibility, I think, should be the grounding philosophy.
And we've all learned a lot about ourselves in the last 14 months. And so the flexibility enables people to play to their strengths right now.
Yes, exactly. Moving on to, I guess, also flexibility in that theme, but also just the university providing support for its students. So will there be accommodations for students who struggle with access to stable internet or Wi-Fi, who live in a multi-person household with other family members who need internet bandwidth?
I'm hopeful that we provided a decent amount of support, but I did meet with one of our students just this past week, the week before, maybe a week ago, and he had done some research on the digital divide amongst at San Francisco State students, and he had experienced it himself. And so we're reaching out to him to learn more. But we're going to have to. Yes, the answer is yes, and we have federal funding to do this. So we just have to figure out where the gaps are. So I urge students who are struggling with the digital divide issue to please contact Academic Technology. We have an incredible Office of Academic Technology that will work very hard to help accommodate students. So, but you have to let us know what the gaps are. And we do have federal funding to help with some of this.
That's good to hear. Now, more like, I guess, philosophical question for yourself. So how do you think COVID-19 has changed the university experience? And how do you think COVID-19 has changed SF State? What changes that were made as a result of COVID-19 do you see continuing beyond the end of the pandemic as well?
So, I was just thinking about this because a year ago I was talking to students, faculty, and staff who were were really quite anxious about the pandemic, and the switch to remote learning and working wasn't easy. And now here we are a year later, and now we're talking about coming back face to face, and we're anxious, and it's not going to be easy. So I can't say entirely what the post-pandemic world will look like, because I think we're still so much in the pandemic world. Even once you're vaccinated, just the anxiety of the variants and another spread. So I think it's going to be a long transition back. Everyone I speak to shares with me a recent anxiety dream, and we're all having the same anxiety dreams, where we're in a group and suddenly nobody has a mask on. Or I just spoke to one of my colleagues, and she was in a group and she coughed, and people wanted to send her home. They didn't want her to stay on campus anymore. So I think that we're going to have this period of we're just going to have to slowly inch our way back. But I think a lot will return. I think students ultimately, the majority of our students are going to want to take the majority of their classes face to face. They're going to want the flexibility of remote learning, and our faculty and staff are going to want the flexibility of more remote teaching and working. So we're going to have more remotely than we ever had pre-pandemic. But at the end of the day, I think particularly our undergraduates and our lower division undergraduates, they're going to want that experience, Andrew, that you had freshman year of coming to, maybe moving into a res hall or an apartment, or commuting from home and going to Cesar Chavez and hanging out with their friends and hanging out on the lawn, working in a lab, hands-on, working in our new beautiful Marcus Hall, state-of-the-art broadcast building. So I think our goal ultimately will be to save what worked and bring back what we loved. I think there will be more online classes, more online service, more online learning, more online teaching and working. But I think we're still going to be largely a high-touch, face-to-face university.
Yes. I agree. I definitely think, specifically when it comes to advising, when it comes to counseling, we found out this year that it provides greater service to students rather than having it in person at the moment. So I think that's a good philosophy to live by.
And we live in a very expensive city where our staff and faculty commute long distances often. So it can also provide some relief to those folks if they're coming to campus, 3 days a week instead of 5. And so I think that we're going to work really hard to save what worked.
Mhm.
And And then we're just going to have to ease ourselves back. I don't know the largest group that you've been in, but I have not sat at a table and had a meal with more than 4 people. 4 people that I've either married or given birth to. I mean, I just haven't done that. And so it's going to be weird at first, and hard. And so we're going to ease back into this.
Yes. One of the final questions I have, but quick to the audience, please, if utilize the chat or the Q&A function, if you want to ask a question to President Mahoney, it's definitely a good opportunity to do so. So please utilize the chat or the Q&A. So one of the final questions I have for you, President Mahoney, what do you believe will be the hardest going into fall 2021?
I think it's balancing such complex desires by people. I was joking around one day that I feel like I'm on a roller coaster, because I'll meet with one group of people and they're demanding, we want to be back to fully open in the fall. We want it back to normal. Then I'll meet with the next group and they're like, don't make me come back in fall. I need to be remote for another semester. And then I'm going to guess that the majority of folks are in the middle there. They may be ready for a little face-to-face, but I'm not ready for BART yet. The thought of being on BART is kind of scary. So, the hard part is going to be, we're just going to have such an array of experiences. We've gotten used to doing this 100% remotely, right? I meet with you and I meet with the incredibly talented and engaged AS board, and we're all in a box, right? Well, in the fall, half of us might be on campus and half of us might be off campus. And we're going to have to figure out, how do we do this at the same time? And so I think this transitionary semester will be our hardest. And then it will get easier after that. And then we've been through a trauma. And let me just rephrase that. We have been through many traumas. I think right now I keep in my thoughts always our Black students and colleagues, because the George Floyd trial, I can only imagine the pain that trial is creating, and obviously what occurred last summer and occurs regularly, or sadly too regularly. Our AAPI students have been through a trauma, and then this pandemic, and then we have many of our students who have gone through economic tragedies in their families. This pandemic has hit working class families brutally. And then we have the health pandemic that's affected us all. So I think we're going to have to pay a lot of attention to how we come back together after so much trauma. And it'll be harder in the fall, but I think it will be ongoing. But let me also add, our generations have gone through traumas before. I think about the generation that went through the Great Depression and the Second World War, or the generation that went through the Holocaust and other deaths. And those generations also brought something out of those experiences that made them agents of great change. And our students want to be agents of great change always. And now they've developed other skills. So I think the next 2 or 3 years are going to be really interesting.
Yes, it'll be interesting. It's going to be hard, but I think as a collective, and I always say this, with very passionate students, with very passionate staff, with very passionate faculty, I like to see the good intent in everyone. If I feel like if you're working in higher education, you're automatically, I would hope, drawn to service and service to students. And I think we've seen that this time around when it came to this whole virtual year, when it came to students vocalizing their voices and being empowered, but also being agents of change when it comes to how campus safety looks like, how programming looks like, how academic policy looks like. That is the uniqueness about San Francisco State that I really love and admire, and I'll always remember. And I think I would not be the person I am today if it wasn't for all of that happening.
You know what, just to share a little a data point, we surveyed our faculty weeks and weeks ago about their plans for instruction. We surveyed the students, and then we just recently surveyed staff. And even though at the time we surveyed them, the vaccine still wasn't widely eligible, or not, wasn't easy to access, more than half of our staff said they wanted to come back. Many of them part-time in the fall, work hybrid, come back to work full-time, but do half of it remotely or something like that. But I thought that showed exactly what you said, which is the commitment of the people at this university. I think that, and this is the way I interpret the demands, the persistent demands to make this university a better place, make it more welcoming, make it more inclusive, because we don't view it as just a university. It's not a place we drop in, but it's our kind of our community and our home. Someone actually discussed this with me yesterday, and I thought it was a really shrewd observation. We have higher standards for San Francisco State than other people have for their universities, and it's pushed largely by the students. So yeah, we will be a better place. I'd love to ask you, if you don't mind, how you think remote learning changed your experience. I mean, obviously, I know there's a lot of loss, specifically now we think about commencement, but you know, how do you think this has changed things for students?
Um, oh, that, I think
Put you
specifically,
on the spot. You warned me about my questions, and I just
but I appreciate that question. I think it really just really depends on, I guess, the courses you're taking, the classes you're taking. I've enjoyed very much asynchronous classes. I've enjoyed synchronous classes as well. I've enjoyed, specifically with my senior seminar last semester, a very small boxes with Zoom, but there's 15 dedicated political science majors really engaging in conversation of what social justice looks like, and specifically with everything going on. Um, and I think it's offered flexibility for students that I think was not present prior to COVID, prior to this pandemic. Um, but it's also been hard for a lot of students. I think, if I'm being completely honest, I have missed one or two assignments, deadlines. I mean, no student is perfect. But I think coming out of this COVID-19 pandemic, coming out of virtual learning, I think flexibility is one thing I hear a lot from my colleagues, from my peers, from my classmates, that they've either received or wanted from faculty. I think the vast majority have received flexibility, and just, conversations with friends. Um, but it was hard. But I think the student body is persistent. I mean, San Francisco State, our students have grit, um, and I think it, we've made it through. And now it's the heart of trying to come back, transitioning back. Um, but I think it's a mixed bag, to say the least. I can't just blanket it with all, um, as if it was not hard, because it was. So
no. And I think sometimes when I hear the people who are concerned about returning, I realize just how traumatic this has been. Um, this was a long time. I think they say, right, it takes 30 days to form a habit. And we're on, 375 or something. And so we're going to have to be really kind to each other. And I'm going to ask people to be patient with me. They were patient with me last spring when we were on the first roller coaster, because this is not, it's not like we flip the switch and everything goes back to January 2020. It's going to yeah, it's just gonna, we're going to be patient. But yeah, I'm with you. The sooner that we can get most of us comfortable being back together, the happier place. Campus looks beautiful. Our custodial and our groundskeeper teams have done a spectacular job. It's now, it seems to be largely a park for people to walk their dogs. It's a beautiful park. So, but to me, it's just, it shouldn't be empty. University campuses should have a lot of noise. And so we're gonna have to be patient with each other and flexible and kind as we come back together.
yes, one saying that I've got from advisors, specifically my advisor Tony, it's, you have to give people grace. Please give me grace. I think it's a very simple saying, but I think it goes a long way. Um, but that's something I truly do try to live by. I think the whole campus collective has to give each other some grace, because I truly do believe everyone is here with the intent of making San Francisco State a better place. Um, Now, there's going to be headbutts, there's going to be disagreements, but that's the beauty of it, because it leads to a better university. Um, Speaking of commencement, oh, go ahead, go ahead.
I was also going to just say that it's also very helpful when students keep channeling questions towards us.
Mhm.
We look at social media all the time. We see what the kind of questions are. One's about commencement, so I'm glad we're going to go there. But then it lets us know what other questions we have to answer for fall. I know right now what everybody wants to know about is the scheduled classes, and that'll be out in May. And so we'll have some news then. But keep hammering us, keep telling us where we haven't given you what you need to know, particularly after that scheduled classes is posted, because it helps us be better communicators. So commencement. I know you and I cannot believe we're talking about a second San Francisco State virtual commencement. And when Oracle Park announced that they're going to have a summer giant schedule, I immediately got emails. Well, this is me commencement's on. They're going to have a summer schedule under great restrictions. You either have to be vaccinated or you have to have been tested. Right now, there's still physical distancing. And so, we're going to have a virtual commencement again. The CDC is still, both locally and CDC nationally, and the San Francisco Department of Public Health is still saying, don't travel unless you have to, and don't travel within 120 miles. And so a virtual commencement is still the safest way to go. So we're going to have another virtual commencement. And I think you've been on the group that's been discussing how to make it even better. But we still will owe the class of 2020 and the class of 2021 something in addition. And so we're going to have conversations, whether it's some kind of a big event up here at Oracle. I've heard other CSUs are going to suggesting things where we take it on the road, and maybe we do events across the state, so that if you're living in San Diego, you could go to one there. But what we're going to do, I think, is survey the class of 2020 and the class of 2021 to see what you might be interested in and where you are. But it's not the same. It's not the same. And so, it's another loss, but it doesn't diminish your accomplishments. And now speaking to you specifically, because you're a member of that class. And I'm hopeful that I thought last year's was a nice ceremony, and I loved seeing all the families in front of the TV set. And I'm hoping you're planning some innovations as well.
Yes, my mom is definitely that person who will plans make it to the best that we can, definitely, whether that's in our patio or such. But I mean, it's our reality that's still very present. And as we hear across the CSU system, I mean, San Diego State, but San Diego State's not San Francisco State, and we have to follow really our mission and the public health guidelines of the city and county of San Francisco. And I think that's the biggest priority, just the health of the overall student body and the campus collective. I was going to say something. Yes, I am on that planning committee, definitely including a lot more student voices and the videos and others. So it should be, hopefully exciting. As you know, I will always be that optimist with that. But yes, is there any questions from the audience that you may have for President Mahoney, or President Mahoney, if you have anything you'd like to say?
I just want to say, we have a lot to look forward to when we get back. In August of last year, we opened a new beautiful residence hall. So many students haven't even seen it yet. Marcus Hall for the Liberal and Creative Arts, the new home of Becca and some other things, is going to be open for classes, and it is absolutely beautiful. And then this summer, I'm happy to say we are going to demolish that very old science building. And the CSU, with one-time capital funds, has provided us $150 million to build that. And there are going to be some other exciting things. We're really focused on making it a sustainable building with solar panels and other things. So our freshmen who join us this fall will be here to see that building opened. Maybe even our sophomores will see that building opened. So there's a lot to really look forward to. And I speak as someone who's also not spent a lot of time with other people. It's going to be weird, for lack of a professional term, but we have so much to look forward to. So even if it's with face coverings on and 6 feet apart, I look forward to seeing students in the fall.
Exactly. And my 4 years here, I've definitely seen the university develop culturally, as well as the culture changing for the better. Whether between staff, between students, between faculty, but also, optically, when it comes to all these new buildings coming up, it's San Francisco State is changing for the better. It really is. I mean, I really do.
And you know, our curriculum, and you talked about you have a senior seminar of 15 people. That's what makes the CSU special, despite the fact that our funding is woefully inadequate from the state. Although I'm very grateful to the governor for restoring it, restoring some of it, but it's still not enough, right? But we work hard at San Francisco State to make sure you have that kind of experience. And when I think of the two buildings, the one that's opening, Marcus Hall, and the other that will open, the Science Building, what distinguishes us is that hands-on learning. I met with a student this week who talked about the work that she got to do in a lab. And she's going to, I can't remember the two, but she got into, I want to say Cornell and the University of Chicago for doctoral programs. That's remarkable, but it's the hands-on learning. And it's that small group learning that you had in your seminar. So yeah, this place is special. It'd be nice to be together doing it again.
Yes, we will get there. We will get there.
And
Well,
you will come back to visit.
yes, of course, of course. Always a Gator. Once a Gator, always a Gator, as they say. Well, thank you so much, President Mahoney, for engaging in this honest conversation about how fall 2021 is going to look, how planning is going to look, the struggles that it has, but I think as a collective and as a campus, we're gonna make it work as we always have.
I thank students for their perseverance. The best thing to leave this pandemic with is having made progress to your college degree. It is a transformative degree, a transformative credential. So I know it's been hard. That's not where you expected to spend your senior year. And so I'm just grateful that for student leaders in AS, Res Life, and across the campus for the work they've done to keep students engaged. And then just the students themselves for sticking with it. It'll be worth it.
Exactly. Well, thank you so much. Our next campus conversation will be with VP Helwig April 16th to really discuss student life and how that's going to look like, both virtually but also on campus. So stay tuned for that, everyone. But with that being said, thank you so much, President Mahoney. You have a good rest of your Friday and also a good weekend as well. Thank you.
Thank you, President Carrillo, and I return all of those sentiments. Thank you to everyone who joined us. Thank you. Bye.